Based on Teddy Bridgewater's preseason performance, is there reason to believe that the Broncos offense can be more efficient in 2021 in comparison to 2020? Not to mention, we take a look at the Broncos defensive projection based on their preseason play, not allowing a touchdown. And we talk about some positions that maybe Denver could target on other teams' waiver wire on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by co-host Sayre Bedinger. Both of us cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On NFL Network and 9 News. Make sure you follow us and make sure you follow and subscribe to the show on your favorite audio podcasting platforms. Hit the subscribe button in video format here on the YouTube channel so you never miss out on a day or a moment of Denver Broncos coverage courtesy of Sayre and myself. Free and available everywhere. Sayre, my man, hey, look, we are looming. This is the day, Tuesday, deadline, 2 p.m. Mountain Time, roster cuts. No moves have been made by the Broncos as of yet. A lot of these moves are going to come on Tuesday, but for the most part, I wanted to go back and reflect on the preseason with you, my man. But first off, how you doing?
Doing great, Cody. Doing great. We see, like you said, a couple of, minor trades trickling in for other teams around the league. Kind of makes me wonder if there's things behind the scenes that are just kind of being worked out. But overall, man, doing good. Having a great Monday so far, and ready to talk some more Broncos football.
Well, let's dive right into it. And you brought this up when we were texting back and forth about what we're going to talk about on today's show, and you brought up a very interesting angle. When you look at Teddy Bridgewater's preseason performance, right? 3 games of preseason action, limited snaps in totality for the Broncos and for Bridgewater, and his finishing pace came out to 22 of 30 in terms of attempts versus completions in 3 games of action, 241 yards and 3 touchdown passes. Now, on that, there's also a listed amount of plays. Teddy Bridgewater, through 3 preseason games, played in a total accumulation of probably about the total number of plays or snaps that he's going to get in an actual regular season game. So it translates well when you look at 3 preseason games. If this were 1 game, this would be a pretty good statistical stat line for Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, how steady could Teddy Bridgewater be for the Broncos here this upcoming season? And when I say steady, I don't want to use it in the term that many Broncos fans are using on Twitter that, well, he's just steady. He's going to go, short. He's going to throw the short routes. He's not going to do too much. Steady is good, I think, if you're the Denver Broncos, if you're looking at the offense in comparison to years past. And what we mean by steady, more consistent, not turning the ball over. This was a good start for Teddy. Now, can he maintain that in the regular season? What are your thoughts?
It's a great thought, Cody, and I think that there's definitely some validity to it. I think and I'm just kind of assuming here, so, I could be wrong about this, but I think what fans tend to think of when they think, oh, we're getting a steady quarterback and he's just kind of boring in general. He'll go out there and complete passes. He'll check the ball down. I think people kind of, think maybe of like a Trevor Siemian type of guy who was definitely a quarterback that liked to check the ball down, but also wasn't necessarily, the same type of talent as you're getting from Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater, to his credit, a former first-round draft pick. I mean, that's easy to forget based on the fact that he's been kind of bouncing around the league a little bit due to his injury in Minnesota. So I think that, and the circumstances, obviously, when he was with the Saints. So I think what we saw from him in New Orleans was a vastly, vastly improved player, even from what he was in Minnesota. And that took him some time, obviously, to get healthy. So when you're talking about having a steady option, I think you're talking about having a pretty steady, solid, good option, not just steady as in he'll be below average most weeks and then, maybe average on other weeks. I think you could get above average quarterback play on a consistent basis from Teddy Bridgewater last season, even with the situation in Carolina not having Christian McCaffrey, kind of dealing with an injury himself. Poor offensive line play, still completed over 69% of his passes. And if you get even close to that in Denver, we're seeing the fruits of what he can do. He completed, just over 77% of his passes in preseason play, which is very, very good. And then you have 3 touchdowns added on top of it. I know they went for, a couple 4th down plays and one that they might not in the regular season. But at the same time, that stat line, if you took it as a 1-game sample, you can't extrapolate over 17 games. I mean, it's not like he's going to be doing that over 17 games. Not many quarterbacks in league history can, but at the same time, if you can get that, even the majority of the time or even half the time, I think the Broncos are definitely going to be a contending team in the AFC with that kind of production from Teddy Bridgewater.
And it goes back to 2020 as well. And I know you and I have had this conversation. When you look at the Broncos in 2020, we talked about how turnovers plagued the offensive unit. Yes, it was a young unit, but turnovers absolutely plagued their growth. And going back and looking at the schedule last year for the Broncos, they lost 6 games, Sayre, 6 games by 7 points or less. And you have to go back to those games and wonder, maybe if one of those drives that ended in a turnover came away in 3 points, maybe even a touchdown. Maybe it's a difference maker between the Broncos missing out being bottom of the AFC West to them getting a wild card spot in the playoffs or maybe competing within the division, because Kansas City also dropped a couple of games down the stretch last year too. So I look at all these things that the Broncos have, and I look at Teddy Bridgewater. When we talk about sustainability, if Teddy Bridgewater can protect the football and the Broncos can have a strong running game and he can capitalize and play to the level he was in the preseason. Yes, he got off to an 0-for-6 start against the LA Rams, but he finished 5-for-5. You want to be able to see consistency, right? And so far what we've seen from Teddy in preseason, he can be consistent. He can stack it up. And even though he got off to a slow start, he finished pretty strong in third preseason game action here. I do think that the Broncos' goal, based on what Pat Shurmur decided, based on what Vic Fangio and George Paton had talked about in this quarterback competition, they want to go with consistency because they look at that metric. 6 games lost by 7 points or less. If you protect the football, you maybe win half those games there. So I do agree with this, Sarah. I think that there's some merit to that when it comes to Teddy Bridgewater and Broncos country. Let us know what you think in the comment section down below on YouTube, or tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos, on what you think about whether or not Teddy Bridgewater's preseason play, if he can perform that way, is it sustainable for a 17-game season that could equate to Broncos success? We look forward to hearing from you about Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. We're going to talk about the Broncos defensive projection for 2021 based on some preseason action. We also pinpoint some of the concerns maybe that we have going into the season and wonder if this is going to be something that creeps up for the team. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's our good friends over there, betonline.ag. And it's that time of the year again, and all eyes are now turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron for the start of the NFL regular season in just a week's time. And as always, BetOnline is your number one go-to for all the pro and college football action, courtesy betonline.ag. And you can get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including the online biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL survivor contest, all of which are now open at betonline.ag. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus when you use promo code NFL100. You can also bet on the season opener between the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25. Take advantage of that promotion here today. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Sarah, the defensive side of the ball, I'm a big fan of it. We talked about it in the Minnesota game, the Seattle game, and even the LA game. Even though the Broncos gave up some yardage and there were a couple scares there, I think for the most part, the Broncos defense looks so much more improved, and you can see the depth here. And I also saw in that LA Rams game, yes, the Broncos, they were giving up yardage. The Rams were marching down the field, but you know what? They held up in the red zone once again, not just the first team defense, the second team defense, the third team defense. And in my opinion, when you look at that and you hold teams to field goals, that's a pretty good winning formula here for the Broncos. Now, do you think that they can maintain that going into the regular season?
I really hope so. I mean, you don't often see, and it doesn't matter what level of competition you're going up against, you don't often see any team give up 0 touchdowns over the course of an entire preseason. I mean, that's 12 quarters from your defense of not giving up a touchdown, whether that's the result of turnovers being forced, whether that's a result of great red zone play. Whatever the case may be, the Broncos have figured out, under Vic Fangio, if nothing else, they've figured out how to tighten up in the red zone. They play extremely well there. The key for me, Cody, is going to be figuring out how to get this defense to play not necessarily bend, but don't break anymore. I would love to see them get some more 3-and-outs, get some more turnovers. I love the red zone efficiency that they've had as a unit. But definitely it's time now with this many, high-priced guys, this many veterans, these high expectations for the defense. I think now you're really needing to see more of the early, we're getting a sack early on and we're getting a 3 and out, and we're forcing. That made that 2015 defense so special to me, is the fact that they could get 3 and outs just like that. It was almost like you knew, well, if the offense is going to be bad, at least we know they're going to get the ball right back and get another shot at it. So that's the kind of thing that we need to see from Vic Fangio's defense this year, I think, is just improvement in terms of don't be that bend but don't break type of defense. And of course, if that's what you need to do at times, go ahead and do it. But I think at the same time, Cody, we're looking for more turnovers and more 3 and outs. Get that ball back to the offense quickly.
Well, Vic's first year as the defensive coordinator of the Broncos, they couldn't get many sacks. They couldn't get any turnovers, really. They hardly forced any. And then they improved in the sack department in 2021. They were getting after the quarterback with relative ease, consistently one of the top pass rushing units in the NFL without Von Miller, might I add that. And even Shelby Harris at times, obviously, who missed that 4-game stretch, obviously with COVID, and then missed another game due to a knee injury towards the end of the season. They had guys like Malik Reed stepping up and, obviously Bradley Chubb contributing at a high level, guys like Draymond Jones in rotational roles. But outside of that, Sayre, I think when you look at this defense, I think you're spot on. This is a defense that has all the talent in the world. When you talk about guys like Justin Simmons, who's an all-pro safety, Kareem Jackson, who's a veteran guy who played, in my opinion, at an all-pro level last year, you have the cornerbacks, you have the talented skill players there, and you have the talented pass rush back, and you have a talented defensive line. Linebacker is also pretty good and more stout than most teams are getting credit for in terms of where the Broncos are at. There is no excuse or no reason this year that the Broncos defense can't dominate. I would love to see them come out and be like the LA Rams were last year, where they're dominating. They're getting after the quarterback. They're getting interceptions. They're forcing fumbles and recovering them. How many times did we see last year? And I'll go back to that last LA Chargers game right before half. Remember Draymond Jones got a sack on Justin Herbert? Or actually, it was Jeremiah Atauchi that got the sack. And the ball rolls, and if the Broncos recover, they're coming away with points at the end of that first half there. They don't get it. The ball, anytime they forced a fumble, would always bounce in the hands of the opposing team that fumbled it. And just so many missed interception opportunities, drops. I mean, go back to the Pittsburgh Steelers game. Michael Ojemudia has an interception in his hands. He drops it. The next play, bam, touchdown, Chase Claypool. It's a turning point that when you miss out on one of those, you lose these opportunities to maximize your potential as a unit. There's an area of concern I think I have, and it's a small concern here coming into the regular season. This was something that the team dealt with last year, and I don't know if it's necessarily based on just scheme, but in the Rams game, we saw the Broncos starting defense struggle against second and third string players with that Sean McVay style of offense where it's a lot of motion, misdirection, play action, where they're going to allow a pass rusher like Von Miller or Bradley Chubb to come free, and they're going to dump it off into the flat to a guy coming backside underneath. I worry a little bit about the Broncos contain, because several times in that Rams game, they gave up contain, they gave up the edge, and sometimes the defensive lineman got too far upfield where they tuck it up. Is this a concern that you also note?
I think so. I do think so, Cody. I think that there's definitely a fine line between being lucky and being good. But you got to have a great combination of both if you're a defense, and you've got to work on that kind of stuff. Just like, we've heard our friend Tim Jenkins talk about how wide receivers got to really work the scramble drill in practice so that you can execute it during games. There's value in those rudimentary drills at getting after the football when it hits the ground, or just in general, just practicing catching the ball as a defensive back. You've got to be able to make those game-changing plays. You can't miss those opportunities because, like you said, one play, it's the missed interception, it's a dropped interception, or it's the missed fumble recovery. The next play, you're looking at a touchdown going the other way. That's just absolutely deflating. And it's those kind of things, that some might call death by inches, Cody, that add up, to the result of those 5-point losses, the 4-point loss, the 6-point loss, those little things over the course of the season really add up to whether or not you make or miss the playoffs in general.
I think that's spot on, too. And I think that there is obviously a lot of pressure. And I say that because, look, Vic is entering his third year as the head coach for the Broncos. Despite the fact that those defenses in his first year couldn't get sacks or turnovers, and then they couldn't force many takeaways last year, they're still a damn talented unit, which has been crazy because, Sayre, if we think about it, if they could get those turnovers, get those takeaways, they could be even better. I mean, they could be in the conversation, maybe having one of the greatest defenses ever if they're able to capitalize on that. But that's a huge what if. I do think based on what we've seen, I imagine this year we could see more takeaways for the Broncos defense. I would like to see them play a little bit more tight in terms of their coverage rather than playing off ball. You have to have guys be able to break on it quickly. Look, Patrick Surtain can do that. I'm not worried about that. Bryce Callahan can lock up. But sometimes you need to go press man. You need to send the house because you've got the cover guys now that can lock down receivers, and you need to drive that pressure home to force that quarterback to throw it into dangerous spaces or potentially lose it. If he holds on to it too long, strip sack, Von Miller, Bradley Chubb. That's what the Broncos need, I think, here in 2021 if they're going to take that next step. This is a critical year for the Broncos, not only just for Vic Fangio, but for the whole entire organization in general. So Broncos country, let us know what you think right there. In terms of the Broncos defense, how you project them for 2021, I think for me, the expectations are high, Sayre. I don't think that the Broncos at this point, I think that they're probably going to be the favorite to be the number one red zone defense once again. We'll see if they can uphold to that. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Sayre and I, we're going to talk about which positions that the Denver Broncos could potentially target on other teams' waiver wires as the NFL cut-down deadline from 80 to 53 occurs. The deadline 2 p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday. But before we do that, let me tell you about the two other sponsors of today's episode of the show. Those are good friends over there, RockAuto.com and DirecTV Stream. With RockAuto.com, if you need anything for your vehicle, they have everything that you could be looking for. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why should you endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry when you have access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket? You can save time and money when using rockauto.com. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts elsewhere from a chain store or a local dealership? RockAuto.com is a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years, and their prices are always reliably low, whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer. So right now, go to rockauto.com to see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On Broncos in there. How did you hear about his box? So that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts that your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. And our good friends over there, DirecTV Stream. Does this sound familiar for you? Broncos country, you've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, and you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friends log in for all the good stuff like NFL Game Pass. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings out your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no more needing to buy other devices ever again. And the best part is that there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required, and content varies by package. All right, Sayre, let's get into the fourth quarter action. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Just a reminder, Broncos country, if you love getting this daily Broncos content and coverage, make sure you do us a favor, hit that subscribe button on YouTube, turn on the bell notification so you get notified anytime an episode drops here on the YouTube channel, not to mention your favorite audio podcasting platform. Every single day, we got you covered. Sayre, with cuts coming in, we see it all the time. There's a variety of NFL teams that are eyeing certain teams' moves just so that they can poach some guys that maybe the Broncos want to bring back on the practice squad. In your opinion, when you're looking at the roster cut-down date, the Broncos have 16 practice squad spots available. Which positions do you believe that Denver could target in the waiver wire, potentially for other teams?
Yeah, Cody, I got to start with the offensive tackle position, right? I think that, we kind of hoped that Cam Fleming could be a potential even starter at the right tackle position, but ultimately he didn't even end up competing with Bobby Massey and Calvin Anderson, who have kind of separated themselves as the 1-2, as the other tackles besides Garrett Bowles. So right now, I think you and I talked about this on our kind of 53-man roster prediction episode. I think that there's a chance the Broncos start off with just 8 active roster offensive linemen, and that's not necessarily due to the fact that I don't think they would want to keep a ninth. I think the ideal in this kind of situation would be to have an extra offensive tackle. So, and I think there's going to be guys available, Cody. I don't know necessarily who. Maybe you look to the trade market. Maybe there's some teams looking to dump some guys, and not often does that happen. But we saw even a pretty solid name hit the waiver wire immediately, almost on Monday. Tyrell Crosby from the Detroit Lions, a guy that many Broncos fans wanted in the draft process back in the day, back in, I believe it was 2018. So anytime you have a new coaching staff and a new general manager come into a place, you can always look for guys that might have been previously, not necessarily high draft picks, but maybe guys that have, developed, and then all of a sudden they're no longer wanted by the new regime. So I think offensive tackle is one spot for sure for me. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on that, or if you have another position too that you're kind of eyeing.
May sound a little bold here, though, Sayre. I'm going to say quarterback here. And the reason why it kind of goes to the point of what we were talking about. And I think that I just don't think that if you cut Brett Rippon, I think he's gone. I think there's going to be some team that picks him up, because there are some teams out there that could use a backup with his smarts. And Brett Rippon is very smart, and that's been something that's always been well attributed to him. But I do think that if Brett Rippon stays in the active roster, I still think that the Broncos go out and they add a quarterback to the practice squad. And the reason I say this, Sayre, is because of the fact that we're still living in a COVID year. And you're seeing, just even today, Carson Wentz, for example, now going on the COVID list. And they also have a guy, I believe it's Sam Ehlinger or it's Jacob Eason. One of those two guys got injured. They're going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. So now they're in shambles in terms of their quarterback room right now. The Broncos are a play away or a close contact away from being in a similar situation that they were last year, where Kendall Hinton has to step up. And yes, you don't want to put Kendall Hinton in that position twice. You would be foolish to have that happen. So I think for Vic Fangio, he mentioned it, and I think this is where the Broncos are leaning. He did mention there's a little bit of unsettledness there when it comes to not knowing if you're going to lose your quarterback, because the NFL, they're not playing around this year. They're not going to postpone games. They're not going to reschedule, even though that if they did, they wouldn't do it for the Broncos. I mean, we all know that. So I think quarterback is going to be one of those positions. They're probably keeping an eye on things in terms of the waiver wire. Look, don't even be surprised. You mentioned Nick Foles. Could the Broncos maybe, if the Bears let Nick Foles go at their cuts, the Broncos could pick him up. I could see that happening. Or even if Trevor Siemian, for some reason, gets cut by, I believe it's the New Orleans Saints, I think that maybe Denver, they might add him back to that list. You never know. You just want to have a guy. And I think that's where the Broncos are at. Are there any other positions outside of maybe what we were talking about just now that you might be looking at, besides tackle and quarterback, that Denver could target?
Yeah, I think defensively, linebacker is one of those spots that I would be looking at and kind of scouring the waiver wire. I think with special teams kind of becoming such an issue for the Broncos, and there's really, at this point, the two of the Broncos starting linebackers, they're the two starting linebackers, they're not really key special teams contributors at this point. So you've got to find out ways that you can round out your depth there. We already saw the team let go of Josh Watson. I think they'll end up keeping Curtis Robinson, maybe Barrington Wade on the practice squad, depending on what happens there. But I think that's a position where they're going to be scouring the waiver wire, whether it's guys that, ultimately get cut or released or maybe trade. Dallas has a lot of linebackers, Cody. So, I like the contract right now, Leighton Vander Esch. So I don't know if they're going to be keeping him around, what they're going to be doing there. But obviously we saw them draft Micah Parsons. They drafted Jabril Cox, another big Broncos fan favorite in the pre-draft process. They signed Keanu Neal, Dan Quinn's guy from Atlanta, and switched him to linebacker. So, yeah. And then you've also got Jalen Smith around still and other guys. So, I mean, there's so many guys in Dallas that you can't help but wonder, what they're planning there and what they're going to do there. And with Leighton Vander Esch's contract being in the final year of his rookie deal, declined the 5th-year option. I think he's like $3 million this season, something under $4 million. He would be a player that I'd be very interested in, that kind of a reclamation project. And that's just kind of like my style. I put on my GM hat, Cody, and I'm like, who would I want to acquire? I don't really prefer going the old veteran route. That's not really my thing. I know the Broncos under John Elway did that quite a bit, but that's just really not my thing. So I think linebacker is a spot, and there's guys available. I mentioned on the previous show, like Nathan Gary plays a lot of special teams. Reuben Foster, I don't know that he plays special teams, but if he's healthy, he's another reclamation project that I'd be very interested in seeing the Broncos try to develop a guy like that. Why not? I mean, just see if it sticks, So, and then there's other guys, like Joe Bacci in Cincinnati, a guy that I was talking to with one of our good friends on Twitter about him. The Broncos previously tried to acquire him off of waivers, and if Cincinnati lets him go, does Denver try to do it again? Minnesota, who's on the bubble there at linebacker? You never know if George Payton wants to bring in another one of his guys. So I think linebacker is a spot for me, Cody, that I'm really looking at on this waiver wire circuit to see if teams let go of some good players.
I'm just going to say, give me the Rams backup punter, please. 55-yard average against the Broncos, and his longest punt was 70 yards, Sayre. But a 55 average in comparison to Sam Martin, who was 44.5 average on punt.
Jeez.
I'm telling you, look, if you can spin it, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a thing there because I know we talk about special teams, and it goes back to Marquette King, who we knew, Sayre, could absolutely boom it. I mean, I still follow my talk with Marquette King from time to time on Twitter. He's booming punts still. And we always go back to that. And he has said that Tom McMahon had forced him to change his routine, how he does it. And that could mess with the player completely. It's like you're trying to tell a quarterback necessarily, hey, change your stance, change your footwork. It's hard to do that in the moment. It takes time, and there's a carryover there. So part of me is wondering, we're seeing these other punters just boom it, and the Broncos are averaging around 44, 45 yards a punt. I mean, that's decent, but when you're backed up sometimes, like the Broncos have been, look, I'd take a field flip like the Rams punter did the other night with that 70-yarder. I mean, that was a beautiful punt. So if he ever hits waiver wires, I hope the Broncos will try to put a claim in on him. But the reality is there's going to be other NFL teams that are probably saw the same thing or saying, hey, we're going to take him. So I don't even think Denver's going to be in a position there. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Locked On Broncos, free and available everywhere on your favorite podcasting provider and also on YouTube. You can watch us if you're tired of hearing of us. If you're tired of watching us, you can listen to us on your drive to work every single morning. Just make sure you go Locked On Broncos, hit that subscribe or follow button. Tune in every single day. You love the show, please leave a review on iTunes. It would mean the absolute world to Sayre and myself. But we appreciate being able to bring you daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Roster cuts are coming, Broncos country. We're going to have a complete reaction once the final 53-man roster is set on Tuesday, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to break it down here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.